There is a ridiculous amount of conversation out there right now about the idea of Healthspan. And part of this is due to Peter Attia's book and the wonderful recommendations he has for how we can not only try to extend our lifespan, but remain healthy until the very end. I think there is some very low-level, easy fruit that we can reap. And in this video, I just want to share with you some of the easiest, smallest actions you can do in order to live the healthiest, longest life that you can. Now, we all know the real answer begins with things like diet and exercise. But those things are very difficult to do. I understand the way my diet should be, but I really love carbs. So if you put chips in front of me, I'm probably gonna have some. And I understand how much I should exercise every day, but sometimes I just don't want to. These are difficult ways to go about increasing your health span. I wanna talk about the easiest possible ways. And the first rule, no question, is avoid injury. The older we get, the more injury can be a real hazard to our longevity. But even when we're young, there are injuries that we don't ever fully recover from. Number one, just avoid injury. And it's useful to think about this both in the short term and in the long term. In the short term, avoiding injury is fairly obvious. Like, just be careful about the things you do. One of the questions I always have in my head is, what's the worst that could happen? And so when I take some action, I go climb a tree, whatever, like, the worst that could happen maybe is I fall out of the tree and break my arm. That's not so bad. Arm will probably heal completely. I'll go ahead and do it. But if something is like the worst that could happen is you get hit by a car, maybe let's not do that thing. So avoiding injury in the short term is about considering the risks of the actions you take and making sure that you take actions that avoid injury. But in the long term, it has a very different idea. In the long term, avoiding injury is something that we're actually pretty bad at in terms of the medical industry. The medical industry is great at stopping short-term death. If you get a gunshot wound and you get to the hospital fast enough, you'll probably survive. Now, that's a very traumatic injury, but our medical system is very good at stopping quick death. But long-term death, our medical industry has difficulty with. Now, God forbid, but if you or I get cancer or diabetes, we're gonna have some trouble because our medical industry just does not have good answers to this. So over the long term, avoiding injury is things like make sure you go in for your yearly medical checkup. That way, any conditions like this can be diagnosed as early as possible and give you the most agency over trying to fight it. So we really want to avoid injury just because injuries have lasting consequences that are totally against having a long health span. But if all we do is try to avoid injury, we'll actually incur other problems because the more we avoid injury, the more we'll be sitting with a very comfortable life and living in comfort. And that's great, except that the thing that's really incredible about humans is the way we adapt. Our bodies are absolutely adaptation machines. The more comfortable we are, the more we're weaker tomorrow. And so this brings about the second rule about increasing our health span to the maximum. And that rule is approach discomfort every single day. Now, I believe discomfort exists in many, many different realms of our life, and we should try to approach it every single day. So if I've done nothing today that is physically uncomfortable, I should probably go exercise. Or I should probably maybe hold off a meal or something like that to control my calories. But regardless, I should do something that is physically uncomfortable. And the reason is that discomfort is a type of strength in my future. I believe this is one of the greatest benefits we get from cold baths. It literally is just about approaching discomfort, and probably sauna and lots of other things that you could do as well. So in order to have the longest health span possible, we need to, number one, avoid injury, but number two, approach discomfort every single day. It could be physical discomfort, emotional discomfort, spiritual discomfort. There are many different ways to approach discomfort, and probably the healthiest thing is to do all of them every day. The third recommendation I would give is actually a set of two things that are the easiest things to do in the world, but most people don't. So the first of those two things is just drink water. When I was in my 20s, I found it was very common for me to go directly from drinking coffee in the morning to drinking beer in the afternoon, and that was truly destructive for my health. Now, I go from drinking coffee in the morning to quitting coffee around 11 or 12 o'clock in the morning, and I drink a lot of water over the rest of the day. I also drink a couple pints of water as soon as I wake up in the morning. It's the absolute low-hanging fruit. Our body content is so much water, and our health is so dependent on having water in our systems. I mean, that water is to purge the bad things and also to increase the good things in our health. Drinking water is important. And it's so easy. And the second of the pair of things I would recommend is make sure you get enough sleep. We're finding more and more every single day, it seems like, about how important sleep is for our long-term health. If you really think it's just impossible for you to get enough sleep, my first thing I would tell you is make sure you spend 9 hours a day in bed. If you use a sleep tracker, one of the first things I think you'll see as a pattern is that if you spend 8 hours in bed, you are not sleeping for 8 hours. I would actually think if you spend 8 hours in bed, you're pretty lucky if you get 7 hours of sleep. For me, it's almost always on a good night's sleep. I have 1 hour during the night that I am not sleeping, which means if I want to get 8 hours of sleep, I'd better be spending 9 hours in bed. There are a lot of other things we should also do in order to increase our sleep lives. And if you listen to Huberman, you'll hear a lot about circadian rhythm and make sure you get out and see the sun when it's low in the sky in the morning. Seeing the sun when it's setting is also really great for our rhythm. Stopping consuming caffeine early in the day. It's really important that we do all of these things, but the main habit I would recommend isn't any of those specific things, like whatever ones you can do easily, you should do. But the big one is make sure you get enough sleep. So avoid injury, both in the short term and the long term. Approach discomfort every day in many different ways. Drink enough water, get enough sleep. And then my fifth recommendation is really about designing your life to be the life you want it to be. I would call this fifth tip goal, strategy, tactics. Now, most of us, I think, end up jumping straight to tactics. We think like, okay, I want health for myself, I go to the gym. Well, you're jumping completely over the strategy, and really you're not nailing down your goal very well either. I think it's really important that all of us are actually actively trying to discover who are we as people, what's important to us, and what do we want for our lives. When you know who you are, then it becomes easy to write down what are your goals in life. For myself, obviously, I'm here trying to spread the word about lots of things that I think are important. I think it's important we all try to live long, healthy lives. I also think it's important that we all deal with the search for absolute truth. And does that mean for you that you believe in God or you have faith in something else? Well, that search and making it personal to yourself is massively important for finding meaning in your life. So writing down those actual goals about what you want to do is a start to this process. But the next step in the process is thinking about strategy. So as an example of a goal, if you want to have long-term health, what does that look like in terms of strategy? Well, the first thing is that you realize the strategy has to be much larger than anything you'd expect. If you actually think about long-term health, there's a balance of so many things. We need to maintain our physical health, but also we need to maintain our mental health. We need to maintain our social health. There are many, many different aspects of health, and if any of them go away, we begin to have difficulty with that longevity piece. Like physical health is obvious, but if you start to get dementia, that's also a really difficult old age. So your mental health is, I would say, even more important than our physical health. And if our relational health degrades and we don't have a community, well, it's difficult to find meaning in the activities you do unless you have those relationships. So it's important we maintain the health of our community as well. All of this is discussing the idea of strategy. We have this one goal, in this case, long-term health. So the strategy has to match that goal. What are all of the grand ideas and things that we need to balance? And then you take all of those pieces of strategy and we can boil them down to tactics. We want physical health? Well, it begins with drinking water and making sure you're sleeping enough. The good next steps would be thinking about your diet and exercise routine. And of course, the list of things goes on and on and on. And then we would consider every different piece of the strategy that we need and how we can maintain that. And then if we can take those tactical things and take action on them, we achieve our goals. And in the end, nailing down that goal and strategy is so important because the tactics are difficult. So I have to be able to remind myself when there's a plate full of carbs sitting in front of me, the fact that I do want to have long-term health. And the way that I can maintain that initiative to take the action of eating the right things is by keeping my mind on the goal. So if I don't nail down that goal, it's really hard to take the right action. So check in with me and say, are these easy things to do? Number one, avoid injury, and think about that in terms of short-term and long-term. Number two, make sure every single day you approach discomfort and think about those different realms of life that you can approach discomfort in. Number three, drink enough water and get enough sleep. And then the fourth thing, if you really want to design your life and have agency and live a life that you love, you have to nail down your goal, strategy, and tactics. If this is interesting, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button. This is the Stoic Yogi, out.